Judge Grayson thought he was dealing with just another dumb teenager until this kid started acting like a real lawyer. The courtroom in Los Angeles was packed with people watching. Everyone was whispering and waiting to see what would happen. There was this 19-year-old kid named Jalen Dawson standing at the table. He had his hands in his pockets and his chin up, showing he wasn't scared. They said he stole a car and ran from the cops. Those are pretty serious charges, but Judge Walter Grayson was looking at him like this was going to be easy. The judge was sitting back in his chair, tapping his fingers on his desk. He looked down at Jalen over his glasses with a mean smile. "You think you're some kind of legal expert? This isn't a debate club, kid." Some people in the courtroom started laughing. The bailiff, the person writing everything down, and even the prosecutor were all laughing too. But Jalen didn't laugh back. He wasn't scared either. See, Jalen had been getting ready for this moment his whole life. Not this exact moment. He never planned to be in trouble. But he knew courtrooms really well. While other kids were learning about sports, he was learning about laws. While his friends played video games, he pretended to be in court cases in his head. His mom, Denise, worked as a paralegal for over 20 years. That's someone who helps lawyers. Jalen grew up listening to her stories about how prosecutors sometimes cheat, how judges pick favorites, and how some defense lawyers don't even try. By the time he was 14, he understood court cases better than most college law students. But Judge Grayson didn't know any of this. To him, Jalen was just another kid in trouble. "Let's make this quick," the judge said, opening the case file. "I have a golf game at 2. People laughed again, but this time something changed. Jalen smiled just a little bit because the judge had just made his first mistake. The prosecutor, Mitchell Carrington, stood up. He was wearing a nice suit and tie, and he talked like he had already won the case. "Your Honor, we will prove that Jalen Dawson was caught red-handed in a stolen car. It was a 2022 Audi A6 that was reported missing just hours before he got arrested. Police chased him through downtown where he tried to run away. His fingerprints were on the steering wheel. The evidence speaks for itself." This sounded really bad for Jalen. People in the courtroom started whispering. A stolen car, a chase, running away, it all looked terrible. Judge Grayson looked at Jalen over his glasses and told the prosecutor to continue. The prosecutor walked toward the jury box. His shiny shoes clicked on the floor. "The defense might try to tell you this was all a big misunderstanding. That Mr. Dawson is just an unlucky victim. But let's be honest. What kind of victim runs from the police?" Judge Grayson leaned forward, resting his chin on his hand. Jalen still didn't blink or look scared. The prosecutor kept talking, flipping through papers. "Your Honor, I have testimony from Officer Daniel Ruiz, who personally saw the defendant behind the wheel before he tried to run away. The car was confirmed stolen. The arrest was done correctly." Judge Grayson nodded. "Sounds straightforward to me." And for most people in the room, it probably did. The case seemed clear. Stolen car, chase, arrest. But Jalen had spent too many years studying court cases not to see the problems. He stayed quiet, watching and waiting. Judge Grayson tapped his gavel lightly. "All right, let's hear what the defense has to say." He looked at Jalen's lawyer, a public defender named Lisa Thornton. She had barely said anything since coming into the courtroom. She stood up nervously. "Your Honor, my client." Jalen put his hand on her arm to stop her. She looked confused, then sat back down. For the first time, Jalen spoke. "I'll be representing myself, Your Honor." The room went completely silent. Judge Grayson stared at him, clearly amused. "You'll what?" Jalen's voice was calm and steady. "I'll be defending myself." People started whispering. The bailiff's eyebrows shot up. The prosecutor's smirk disappeared for a second before he let out a sharp laugh. "This should be interesting." But no one was laughing when Jalen took his first step forward because everything was about to change. The courtroom felt heavy around Jalen as he stood there with his hands still in his pockets. He let the silence go on just long enough to make everyone uncomfortable. Then he finally spoke. "Your Honor, before I begin, I'd like to confirm something with the prosecution." The prosecutor raised an eyebrow and crossed his arms. "Go ahead." Jalen took a slow step forward. "You said Officer Daniel Ruiz personally saw me behind the wheel before I was arrested, correct?" The prosecutor sighed. already looking bored. That's right. And that testimony is written in his report? Of course it is. Jalen nodded, then turned to Judge Grayson. Your Honor, I move to dismiss that testimony as evidence. Judge Grayson squinted at him. On what grounds? Jalen took his hands out of his pockets for the first time and pointed toward the prosecutor's table. Because Officer Ruiz never saw me in that car. In fact, he wasn't even working when the chase began. A look of confusion crossed the prosecutor's face. What are you talking about? Jalen took another step forward. Your Honor, if the court allows me, I'd like to ask them to check Officer Ruiz's GPS logs from that night. If his report says he saw me in the car, then it should match where his GPS says he was. But I have a feeling it won't. Now people in the courtroom were talking louder. Judge Grayson frowned and looked at the prosecutor. Counselor? The prosecutor cleared his throat, his jaw getting tight. That report was filed by a police officer, Your Honor. Are we really going to take the word of a defendant over a trained professional? Jalen gave a small, casual shrug. If the officer was where he said he was, then the GPS data will prove it. But if he wasn't... He let the sentence hang in the air. Judge Grayson studied him for a long moment, then turned to the prosecutor. Does the prosecution have any problem with checking the officer's GPS logs? The prosecutor hesitated. The pause was just long enough that the jury noticed, the people watching noticed, and most importantly, the judge noticed. Jalen took a quiet breath. He had spent years watching trials and studying prosecutors and how they work the system. And there was one thing he knew for sure. If the prosecutor was confident in his case, he wouldn't be stalling. Judge Grayson sighed and rubbed his temple. Counselor? The prosecutor finally shook his head. No objections, Your Honor. But the shift had already started. For the first time, the courtroom wasn't laughing anymore. The courtroom was quiet, but you could feel the tension. The prosecutor shuffled his papers, his smooth confidence starting to crack. Your Honor, while we wait for the GPS records, the fact remains that the defendant's fingerprints were found on the steering wheel of the stolen car. Jalen nodded, his face showing nothing. That's true. He took a step forward. But let's talk about that evidence for a second. Judge Grayson raised an eyebrow and gestured for him to continue. Jalen turned to the jury, making eye contact with each person. The prosecution wants you to believe that finding my fingerprints in a car means I stole it. That's the story they're selling. But let's think about this logically. He took a deep breath, keeping his voice calm and controlled. Let's say you walk into a department store and try on a jacket. You put your hands in the pockets, maybe zip it up, then put it back on the rack and walk out. A few hours later, someone shoplifts that jacket. Would the fact that your fingerprints are on it mean you stole it? A few jury members looked at each other. Someone in the crowd muttered something under their breath. Jalen didn't give them time to think too much about it. The car in question was parked outside a 7-Eleven hours before the supposed theft. I was inside that store with 3 friends. And yes, when we walked past the car, I leaned against it. I even opened the door because it was already unlocked. I didn't think much of it. Didn't take the car, didn't drive it, didn't steal anything from inside. Just a dumb moment of curiosity. He let that sit for a second. Then in a voice that cut through the silence, he asked, "Does touching something make you a criminal?" The prosecutor cleared his throat, flipping through his notes, searching for something, anything to get back in control. But Jalen wasn't finished. And while we're talking about this, let's discuss how that fingerprint analysis was done. He turned to Judge Grayson. Your Honor, was the forensic specialist from this case called to testify? Judge Grayson blinked, caught off guard by the question. He looked at the prosecutor. The prosecutor hesitated, then reluctantly said, no. Jalen's lips pressed together. So let me get this straight. The state is using forensic evidence to try and convict me, but they didn't think it was necessary to bring in the actual specialist who processed that evidence? No chance for me to cross-examine, ask about the chain of custody, or challenge how accurate the analysis was? The prosecutor's jaw tightened. Jalen nodded like that was all he needed to hear. Interesting. Judge Grayson sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. It was the look of a man realizing this case was not the easy win he had thought it would be. But Jalen wasn't done yet. because the next thing he was about to say would change everything. Jalen took a slow step forward, his voice steady but firm. Your Honor, I'd like to enter into evidence an official statement from the owner of the vehicle. Judge Grayson frowned. The owner? Jalen nodded. Yes, Mr. Raymond Whitaker, the registered owner of the stolen Audi, gave a statement to the police that for some reason was never submitted in the prosecution's files. And I think I know why. He turned to the prosecutor. Do you remember what Mr. Whitaker told officers the night his car was reported stolen? The prosecutor's jaw clenched. He knew exactly what was coming. Jalen didn't wait for him to answer. Instead, he pulled out a printed paper from his file and read out loud. I left my car running when I ran inside the gas station. Some kid must have jumped in and taken off, but it wasn't the guy you arrested. I saw the kid, and he was white. Everyone in the courtroom gasped. Jalen held the paper up. That's from the original police report, the same report the prosecution conveniently never mentioned. He turned back to Judge Grayson. The arresting officer admitted this in his testimony. The prosecution ignored it. And yet they want this jury to believe that I, someone who doesn't even match the description of the real thief, was guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. The prosecutor stepped forward, scrambling. Your Honor, this is irrelevant. The defendant was caught in possession of the vehicle. But Jalen shook his head. No, I wasn't. His voice didn't get louder, but it cut through the courtroom with sharp precision. I was arrested blocks away from where the car was abandoned, walking home after getting snacks with my friends. I wasn't in the car. I wasn't near the car. I wasn't running from anything. The only thing connecting me to this case is bad police work and assumptions. Judge Grayson let out a slow breath, rubbing his temple. The case was falling apart fast, and everyone knew it. Jalen turned back to the jury. The real suspect got away that night. The officers found a black kid in the same general area and decided that was close enough. That's what this case is really about. Silence. Judge Grayson cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. Does the prosecution have anything further? The prosecutor was stiff, his face red. No, Your Honor. Judge Grayson exhaled. He looked at Jalen for a long time, then glanced at the jury. Finally, he leaned forward and spoke the words that would stay with everyone in that room. Case dismissed. There was a beat of stunned silence, then chaos. Half the courtroom erupted. Some people couldn't believe it, some felt quiet relief. The crowd stirred. Reporters were scribbling in their notebooks. Jalen didn't move right away. He let the moment settle, let the reality sink in for everyone. Judge Grayson, still holding his gavel, looked at Jalen with an expression that was hard to read. There was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Recognition, maybe even regret. Jalen met his gaze, then turned to leave. But just as he reached the door, the judge spoke again. Mr. Dawson. Jalen stopped but didn't turn around. Judge Grayson hesitated, then finally said, You should consider law school. Jalen smiled. He didn't need to consider it. He was already on his way. Outside the courthouse, the air was thick with voices. Reporters swarmed the steps, their cameras flashing, microphones pushed forward like weapons. Jalen, did you know the judge would dismiss the case? What are you going to do next? How does it feel to outmaneuver a seasoned prosecutor? Jalen pulled his hoodie over his head, ignoring the questions. He wasn't interested in the show. This wasn't about proving how smart he was. It was about something bigger. His mother, Denise, was waiting for him at the bottom of the steps. Her arms were crossed, her face unreadable. For a long moment, she just looked at him. Then finally, she shook her head and let out a breath. Boy, you scared me half to death, Jalen chuckled, scratching the back of his head. Had to take a risk, Ma. She stared at him a second longer, then pulled him into a tight hug. You always were the stubborn one. The cameras kept flashing, but Jalen wasn't paying attention to them anymore. Across the street, standing by his car, Judge Grayson watched. His posture was different now. The arrogance was gone. His expression wasn't amused anymore. It was something else, something closer to reflection. He hadn't expected this case to be anything more than routine. Just another day, another defendant, another guilty plea. But now he'd remember this one because Jalen had done something most people never could. He made the system look at itself. And for once, it blinked first. Here's the lesson we should learn. How many other cases had gone this way? How many people had been convicted not because of evidence, but because of bias, shortcuts, and a system that cared more about closing cases than finding the truth? Jalen had the knowledge to fight back, but what about the ones who didn't? This wasn't just about one case. It was about all of them. He knew what he had to do next. This courtroom wouldn't be the last one he stood in, but next time he wouldn't be the defendant, he'd be the attorney. And when that day came, he wouldn't be the only one. If this story made you think, even for a second, then share it. The justice system is built on laws, but it's run by people. And people can change, but only if we make them. Hit that like button, subscribe for more stories that matter, and let's keep the conversation going. Because next time, it might not be Jalen. It might be someone you know.